There's some kind of a, old story about there was a bishop who was going to make a very, very important address. And this bishop was one who was kind of full of himself. And so he called in one of the young newly ordained priests. And he said, I want you to introduce me. And I want you to say something inspiring beforehand. And of course, this young guy, he was totally intimidated by that. He goes, well, Bishop, I don't know what to say. What am I supposed to say? And the bishop said, trust God, my son. Trust God. So this young man went off, and like I say, he was very worried, very nervous, very self-conscious. But lo and behold, he looked down and he noticed a packet of 3x5 cards laying there on the ground. They had fallen out of the bishop's pocket. And he looked at them, and they were the notes that the bishop had prepared for his talk. So the young priest, he got up to speak, and he basically, in introducing the bishop, he basically preached from those cards. He gave the bishop's talk and then introduced the bishop. And as they were kind of passing each other towards the dais, the bishop stopped him and said, why did you do that? What am I supposed to do now? The young priest just looked at him and said, trust God, Bishop. Trust God. I say that because this is one of those trust God moments for me. I had a homily prepared. I had a couple of stories picked out talking about compassion, since Jesus looked on the crowds with compassion and all of that. But that first reading just was bothering me too much. It's bothered me for a long, long time, probably 20 years. I don't have to tell you that the last, maybe 2 decades, we as a church have had to deal with just an incredibly horrible scandal. And it has been the revelations of just a few priests who basically took advantage of the trust that their people placed in them and abused children and destroyed many lives. And I think an equally awful part of the scandal was the number of bishops, archbishops, cardinals who knew and didn't do anything about it, who even covered it up. We heard in the first reading, woe to the bad shepherds. Well, that's what we all as Catholics have had to live with for some time now. And it's always been a temptation for me to try to distance myself. Say, well, those bad priests, I don't have anything to do with them. And yet, we priests, we very casually toss around terms like my brother priests. We supposedly have a fraternity with one another. And I want to not be seen as a priest like those priests. But I'm not a perfect priest. I can't set myself up high and mighty and say, I've always been a good shepherd of the people. So even though I've been incredibly embarrassed by these actions, I don't know if I've ever publicly said, even, I'm not saying that I was involved in anything like this, but nevertheless, I am connected to this reality of the church because I am a brother priest. And I know I've suffered through this, and I know that you have suffered through this. And, certainly, if in any way you have been a victim of these actions, then there's nothing that I can say that can make it right. But to ask you to please find it in your heart to somehow, some way, sometime forgive. Don't let that hurt keep sitting inside of you. But even if you haven't directly been affected by this scandal, all of us have. It has put doubts in all of our minds about the reality of the church as it exists today. It has caused embarrassment to all of us. And I don't know if anybody has ever said to you, I am sorry that you have had to go through that. I'm sorry that there has been this incredible distraction from us trying to continue to build God's kingdom. But if you haven't, and maybe even if you have, I want to say to you today, as somebody who, at least in theory, wears the collar, somebody who, in whatever small way, represents the institution, somebody who is a brother, to say, I'm truly sorry for the faults of all of us priests. But especially for the incredible betrayal that has been foisted upon the most precious of all, the least of the least. I feel grateful that Catholics everywhere haven't treated all their priests as being suspect. I'm so appreciative of the fact that you do allow us to continue to minister, to try our best, to share the word, to share the sacraments with you. And I think it just speaks to the depth of the Holy Spirit acting in our hearts, in our midst. So, I don't know what it will take. I don't know how long it will be before we really get beyond this whole thing. I know that there's still a lot of accounting that needs to take place. But for now, I hope in whatever way you can please forgive your shepherds, the good, the bad, all of them, all of us, less than perfect. And let us continue together to answer Christ's call to make our world a more loving place.